The stars shimmered in a lazy spiral above the galactic diplomatic station EOS 9, a glittering construct orbiting a blue dwarf star in a peaceful, if bureaucratically suffocating, region of the Empire. EOS 9 was the crown jewel of galactic empire diplomacy, its marble-like corridors hosting treaties, alliances, and the occasional bribe disguised as cultural exchange. For the Empire, it was a fortress of etiquette and dominance, where newcomers were gently reminded of their place in the galactic hierarchy. Today, however, a new visitor approached. Humanity had finally been granted its first formal diplomatic contact. The Empire expected an eager, slightly backward mammal in ceremonial robes. What they received was Ambassador Miriam Tran, who stepped off the human diplomatic cruiser Silken Rebuttal, wearing a tailored charcoal suit and a calm, enigmatic smile that made seasoned negotiators suddenly remember urgent errands elsewhere. She was in her early 50s, her hair pinned up with steel-gray precision, and her expression fixed in that unsettling human mix of warmth and amused challenge. Beside her stood an aide holding a teapot and 2 cups, a subtle declaration of her preferred method of warfare. Miriam was the sort of person who could say, "Bless your heart," and make you feel like you'd just been eviscerated in 4 syllables. 2 imperial dignitaries, a photosynthetic insectoid named Vrix and a gelatinous ambassador known only as Coil, had been assigned to greet her. Vrix bowed in a rapid, jerky motion. Coil shimmered nervously. "Ambassador Tran," Vrix began in accented Terran standard. "It is a pleasure to welcome you to the Galactic Empire. We hope you find our facilities adequate for your species' comfort requirements." Miriam smiled and extended a hand. "Oh, I'm sure they're more than adequate. I heard your designers were aiming for Baroque Imperial with mild overcompensation." "Nailed it." There was a pause. Coil blinked, or at least did something similar with an undulating ripple across its body. "Was that sarcasm?" Vrix whispered. Coil replied with a soft gurgle that might have meant yes, maybe, or we should evacuate. Later, during a formal reception in the Sapphire Hall, Empire officials gathered to observe this curious human emissary. Golden banners fluttered in zero-grav elegance, while a string ensemble composed of aquatic tentacloids hummed through tubes in perfect disharmony. Miriam sat at the central table, sipping from her own porcelain cup, the aroma of chamomile wafting toward the diplomatic elite. A towering lizard admiral leaned toward a snake-like merchant. "They brought their own tea." "They always bring their own tea," the merchant hissed. "It's the caffeine rituals. They pray to it." When asked if she would prefer the Empire's nectar-based aperitif, Miriam chuckled gently. "Oh, I wouldn't want to spoil your fermentation with our modest barbarism. Though, you will forgive me for trusting beverages I can pronounce." Her assistant offered a delicate smirk while refilling her cup. Through the shimmering crowd came High Vizier Draxilin Theta, a veteran of 100 peacekeeping campaigns and the author of How to Tame a Tribal Planet, Civilizing the Screaming Masses. He was rumored to have single-handedly uplifted 6 pre-warp civilizations by showing them a slideshow of Empire-approved architecture and mildly threatening PowerPoints. "Mammal," Draxilin declared, his voice echoing through his quadruple lungs. "You represent Earth, yes?" Miriam nodded slowly, setting down her cup with care. "I do, though we tend to answer to human. It rolls off the tongue with a bit more historical gravitas." "Your kind is newer than most," he said, lips curling in what may have been a smile or a warning. "Are you prepared to be guided?" She tilted her head. "We've had a lot of experience being guided. Colonization, missionary visits, economic restructuring. Really, we've collected the full set. We found our footing somewhere between the wars and the Netflix subscriptions." Draxilin blinked. Miriam continued. "But I appreciate the offer. And rest assured, we're very teachable. We just tend to grade our teachers." A chuckle rippled among a few neutral diplomats. Draxilin's eyes narrowed, and he turned, waving a dismissive claw. Behind his back, Miriam sipped again and whispered, "That one's not going to age well." By the 3rd day of cultural exchange, confusion had set in. The Empire's scholars couldn't decide if humans were dangerously subversive or terminally quaint. Their food involved terrifying combinations of flavor and temperature. Their music fluctuated between operatic sorrow and something called ska, and their idioms made translators malfunction. Coyle once heard a human use the phrase "raining cats and dogs" and called a security alert, fearing an interspecies meteorological event. Still, the humans were undeniably charming, especially their ambassador. She laughed readily, complimented species-specific jewelry, and participated in an awkward ceremonial dance involving six-legged leaps. Even when her steps were slightly offbeat, she made it look deliberate. But beneath the warm facade was something else. Every word was calculated. Every movement was precise. She listened intently, remembered details others forgot, and smiled a little too knowingly. And then came the gala of mutual accord. It was to be a culmination of the Earth delegation's welcome, an evening of carefully choreographed goodwill, with media coverage spanning 27 star systems. Ambassadors wore their finest traditional garb. The Empire's elite shimmered in scale polish and light-reflecting robes. Miriam arrived in a simple black dress with a single crimson pin, shaped like a downward-pointing blade. It was, her aide said, a human symbol of diplomacy. General Vortax of the Imperial Navy, a hulking being whose species evolved from apex jungle hunters, disliked Earth. He disliked their humor, their informalities, and their slow, polite conquest of every room they entered. More than that, he disliked how they looked at him, as if he were a puzzle already solved. So when Miriam raised a glass of Terran wine and toasted, "To peace through understanding," he saw his chance. Striding forward, Vortax slapped the glass from her hand. Silence fell. The wine splattered across the floor, red and blooming like arterial spray. "She insults us with her smugness," Vortax growled. "Let her know her place." Miriam didn't move for a long moment. Then she looked down at the spill, and her expression changed. Not anger. Not fear. Something colder. Like a scientist observing a failed experiment. She turned to face him. "General," she said quietly, "I assume you speak for your entire military division?" Vortax sneered. "I am the division." Noted. Her aide tapped a device on their wrist. A signal pulsed across secure human channels. It was 7 digits long and required no encryption. Initiate Wrath Protocol. Vortax laughed. "What, are you going to write a strongly worded letter?" Miriam stepped forward. She was much smaller than him. Slower. Seemingly fragile. She leaned in, her voice barely audible. "General, on Earth we have a saying. Don't poke the bear. Do you know why?" He scowled. She smiled. "Because the bear may look like it's asleep. But the moment you poke it, well, things get unbearable." Before he could respond, she turned, collected a fresh glass, and rejoined her table. No one applauded. No one moved. That night, EOS 9's communication logs recorded an unusual spike. 27 encrypted human signals were sent in synchrony. A cargo vessel, the polite suggestion, changed course. Onboard AI across nearby systems detected anomalies. 1,000 harmless-seeming Earth-made devices began to hum softly in alien frequencies. And Miriam Tran slept soundly, knowing every smile she had given in the last 3 days had been loaded like a bullet in a loaded gun. By morning, the Empire would be calm. By next week, it would be begging for that calm back. The first message Earth received in response was panicked and confused. The second was a threat. The third was a request for clarification. Humanity didn't answer. They simply let the silence hang, heavy and ominous, like the breath before a storm. And Ambassador Miriam Tran, sitting at her breakfast table aboard Silken Rebuttal, stirred honey into her tea and said to her aide, "Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Just long enough to make it sting." The aide smirked. "Should I prepare Phase 2? Miriam took a sip. "Yes. And warm the scones." The human smile, once again, was terribly polite. The Earth Council met beneath the refurbished shell of an abandoned lunar base, the walls adorned not with national flags, but a singular emblem, an asymmetrical spiral wrapped around a steaming mug. To most it looked abstract. To those in the know, it represented the 2 founding principles of Earth's interstellar protocol, adaptability and caffeine. The chamber was filled not with politicians but strategists, analysts, linguists, and one very tired man who had built the psychological profile of every known galactic species based solely on their preferred seating posture. The room buzzed with quiet efficiency. The slap heard across the galaxy had been reviewed from 7 angles, lip-read, gesture-analyzed, and finally rendered in a comedic animation that had, inadvertently, gone viral within hours among human civilian networks. It was titled, "Don't Slap the Tea Lady." At the center of it all, standing before a digital star map pulsing with strategic overlays, was Commander Elias Roque. He was not a general in the traditional sense. He didn't believe in overt warfare, considered laser arrays tacky, and preferred to defeat enemies through what he called existential nudges. Dressed in a rumpled black turtleneck and worn-in boots, he had the look of someone who just rolled out of a chess tournament and into a revolution. "We won't start a war," Roque said, voice calm, eyes sharp. "We'll start a doubt." He turned to his team. "Deploy Wrath Protocol, Phase 1. Gentle mischief only. For now." Within hours, polite chaos swept through the Galactic Empire. Humanity's first wave wasn't military, it was culinary. Carefully curated shipments of Earth delicacies arrived at diplomatic ports under the guise of peace offerings. Each crate was labeled Gifts of Goodwill and contained aggressively neutral items. Sourdough starter kits, bean-to-bar chocolate with overcomplicated instructions, an inordinate amount of hot sauce, and vacuum-sealed collections of idioms translated in 32 languages, annotated for tone and sarcasm. The Empire didn't know what to do with any of it. One aquatic species accidentally fermented a cheese plate and assumed it was a weapon. Another made the mistake of interpreting a jar of nuclear mustard literally and detonated it in a sterile testing field, where it merely singed the taste buds of a dozen highly ranked officials and sparked a 5-day addiction crisis. Back on EOS 9, Miriam Tran continued her diplomatic rounds. She said nothing of the slap. She didn't flinch at the whispers. She simply carried herself with that same unshakable grace, wearing serenity like armor. When asked privately by a Harshek delegate whether Earth intended to retaliate, she tilted her head and said, "Retaliate? We're far too civilized for that. Though I can't speak for the algorithms. They get testy when insulted." The next day, the Empire's internal documentation systems began randomly reassigning bureaucratic codes. An Imperial request for peacekeeping ships was redirected to the Imperial Culinary Enhancement Division. Someone received 37 pallets of ketchup. The humans apologized profusely. "It must be a translation issue," said one liaison. "So many vowels in your language. Very unstable." The real operation, however, was already unfolding silently. Beneath the surface of polite disruption, Earth's Psychological Operations Division initiated what they called perception drift. Billions of carefully engineered microstatements, memes, and altered cultural references were uploaded into the galactic data stream. These weren't lies. They were questions, doubts, harmless-seeming comparisons. One image showed a human hand and a galactic elite crest side by side with the caption, "One ruled a planet, the other built the tools that rule galaxies. Which one are you?" Another image depicted a bear sipping tea with the words, "Still asleep. Still smiling." The images were never claimed, never sourced. But they spread, mutated, and reappeared in places they shouldn't, inside educational networks, on prison walls, across transit hubs. The phrase "don't poke the bear" began appearing in official government documents with no explanation. Within days, the Empire's social fabric began to fray, not through rebellion or uprising, but through laughter. There is no weapon more dangerous than a joke in a humorless regime. Vrix, the insectoid ambassador who had first greeted Miriam, found himself unnerved. In private, he reviewed her speech recordings. He began to suspect that half of what she had said was an insult. The other half was a lesson. He couldn't tell which was more dangerous. "I've reanalyzed her semantics," he told Coyle, who had taken to pulsing nervously whenever humans were mentioned. "It's like she's constantly saying two things. One you understand. One you realize later." Coyle burbled softly, emitting a scent only interpretable as wary admiration. In the outer territories, Empire stations began reporting strange malfunctions. Navigation systems rebooted with human song lyrics encoded in error messages. Station AI began asking philosophical questions like, "What is the ethical yield of condescension?" Humanity responded with offers of technical assistance. Roque personally authorized the deployment of polite persuasion units, small civilian-marked ships packed with diplomats, engineers, and cultural liaisons, each trained to the highest standard of friendliness and intellectual intimidation. They arrived with smiles, fixed things that weren't broken, improved things that were, and left every Empire technician wondering whether they'd just been outclassed or merely seduced into irrelevance. One Empire admiral, distraught after his ship began responding to commands in deadpan Terran humor, defected to Earth simply to regain a sense of control. "We tried to intimidate them," he told reporters during his asylum interview. "They just kept offering to help." Meanwhile, Miriam returned to Earth for a classified briefing. She was greeted with applause and a lemon scone, her favorite. Roque met her in a quiet observation chamber overlooking Saturn. "You've stirred the pot well." "I prefer steeped and simmered," she replied. "But yes, they're flailing." He handed her a dossier. Phase 2. She flipped through it, details of a dozen Empire sectors undergoing quiet collapse. Economies disrupted by misplaced trust. Supply lines rerouted by laughter. Religious institutions suddenly obsessed with metaphors involving honey badgers. She nodded. "Send in the next wave of linguists. It's time we taught them what bless your heart really means." Roque smiled, not kindly. Back in the Empire, Draxilin Theta, the High Vizier, tried to reassert control. He convened a grand assembly, declaring humanity a threat, demanding full embargo. He barked words like corruption, subliminal assault, and cultural destabilization. His speech was stirring. It also went viral, remixed within minutes by a human audio artist into a song called Galactic Breakdown, Diplomat, which topped Empire music charts for 6 days straight. The Vizier's office was flooded with fan mail. By the end of the week, 22 minor planets had declared neutrality in human affairs. 3 others requested Earth's input on governance models. One simply sent a crate labeled, "We surrender, please advise." Humanity never once fired a weapon. They had, however, deployed 32 psychological warfare experts disguised as baristas. Miriam, now hailed unofficially across certain sectors as the Shadow Empress of Earth, gave an interview to a neutral broadcaster. When asked whether humanity was deliberately provoking collapse, she smiled. "We don't believe in collapse. We believe in creative reorganization." "And what about your critics, Ambassador? Those who say Earth is manipulating the Empire?" She sipped her tea and said, "Only with consent. Implied, of course." The twist, of course, was that humanity hadn't been caught off guard. Miriam's injury had been anticipated, orchestrated. Her team had identified Vortax weeks before the gala, labeled him predictably arrogant, and arranged for her wine glass to be slightly too full. They didn't want a fight. They wanted a symbol. She was the symbol. The wounded dove with titanium feathers. The human response wasn't revenge. It was rehearsal. They were testing the galactic limits of irony. Back at the lunar base, Roque finalized deployment orders for a series of seemingly innocuous actions. Human entertainment networks were offered at discount rates. Children's programming featured animated alien characters learning about context. Libraries updated universal language packs to include tone markers that only humans seemed to fully understand. He reviewed one final report, a transmission from the Empire's own intelligence division. Subject: Human Strategic Assessment. Status: Inconclusive. Recommendation: Proceed with extreme diplomacy. He chuckled. Extreme diplomacy. I like that. Meanwhile, Miriam returned to EOS 9. She requested a meeting with the Supreme Council under the pretense of de-escalation. They granted it warily. She arrived wearing the same black dress, the crimson pin now polished to a mirror shine. In the great chamber, she walked slowly past rows of representatives. None spoke. Her silence had become mythic. When she reached the central dais, she turned and said, "We regret the incident. Truly. Earth wishes peace." some visibly relaxed. She paused. Then added, however, peace must be built on mutual dignity. And while we're new to the galactic stage, we've studied theater quite thoroughly. Draxelin sneered. Is that a threat, human? Miriam blinked. A threat? No. I find threats are like cologne, most effective when subtle and well chosen. She stepped forward. We're merely suggesting that if the Empire continues down this path of posturing and dismissal, it may find itself outperformed. A buzz ran through the chamber. She continued. So, here is Earth's offer: reset, trade, mutual exploration, laughter, and tea. She looked directly at Draxelin. Or we could simply keep doing what we're doing. Silently, relentlessly, while smiling. He said nothing, but his pupils narrowed. She bowed and walked out. As the chamber doors sealed behind her, she turned to her aide. Was that too much? The aide shook their head. You only used 3 metaphors. Could have been worse. They both smiled. High above the station, a new Earth vessel shimmered into orbit, its name blinking in soft gold letters across the hull. Diplomatic Bear. Inside were 3,000 specialists trained in language, culture, subversion, and forgiveness. The Empire had yet to realize they hadn't angered humanity. They'd given it purpose. And humanity, finally unshackled from its own infighting, was smiling. Which meant, for the galaxy, the real war had just begun. The halls of the Imperial Command Citadel on Mourner Prime once echoed with purpose, each footstep resonating through centuries of unbroken control. Now, they echoed with uncertainty. A new kind of silence crept through the marble arches, not reverent but cautious. The kind of hush that settles before a structure falls, when engineers go quiet and politicians listen to the creak in the foundation, and lie about not hearing it. Supreme Commander Alrex Tava stood at the central dais, flanked by his most trusted advisors, though the term trusted had grown increasingly theoretical. His scales, normally gleaming like sun-polished obsidian, had dulled under weeks of political acid. He had not slept. Sleep invited doubt, and doubt, like the humans, always arrived with a smile and a cup of something deceptively comforting. Tell me again, he growled, voice scraping like stone on stone. How a species that can't agree on the shape of bread is dismantling a galactic empire. No one answered immediately. Finally, Minister Chalet, a thin-framed Marnith with feathers that changed hue with emotion, stepped forward and adjusted her translator collar. They have no central dogma. No doctrine. They improvise. It's not strategy, it's behavioral jazz. Alrex turned, slowly. You're telling me we're losing to musical mammals? Not losing, she corrected carefully. But the tempo is no longer ours. They weren't wrong. Across the Empire's far-flung colonies, the edges were fraying. It hadn't begun with explosions or fleets. It had begun with doubt, whispered beneath ceremonial veils, and in the subroutines of imperial databanks. That doubt had bloomed into curiosity, and curiosity, in the presence of humanity, was a volatile substance. In Sector Trell 14, the Imperial garrison responsible for suppressing non-sanctioned cultural activities found its barracks infested with human board games. No one knew how they got in. Chessboards, Risk, even Uno, each a trap in cardboard clothing. What started as amusement became obsession. Entire evenings were spent hunched over game pieces. Soldiers argued about house rules. Productivity declined. Then obedience. Then belief in the system. By week's end, they'd filed for artistic independence. Elsewhere, logistical support chains began rerouting themselves under the guidance of helpful Earth optimization programs. Those programs, while undeniably efficient, also reprioritized based on emotional resonance indexes and introduced new classifications such as morally questionable shipments and things we can live without. This included weapons, propaganda devices, and the bulk of the Empire's traditional honor ceremony supplies. The Empire's command structure began to rot from the inside, its pillars replaced by kindness metrics and sarcasm detectors. The humans weren't conquering planets. They were liberating opinions. And opinions spread faster than light. Admiral Vesker, commander of the Empire's Western Fleet, made a show of force by bombarding an unaligned moon suspected of harboring Earth sympathizers. The message was meant to be clear. It wasn't. Earth responded by rerouting a food convoy to the nearest Empire port and leaving behind gourmet meals with small fortune cookies inside. The messages read, "Sometimes, power is what you don't use." Another said, "An eye for an eye makes the galaxy hard to pilot." The fleet officers ate every one. Soon, whispers of defection replaced oaths of loyalty. Back in EOS 9, Miriam Tran watched the collapse unfold with surgical grace. She didn't celebrate. She sipped. Her office was modest. No trophies. No banners. Just a wide window showing the curve of the Empire's central planet and a bonsai tree that had, in its quiet defiance of size, become a symbol for the humans stationed there. Ambassador Vrix entered, wings twitching. "You've destabilized the third quadrant," he said. "Your operatives, those poets in disguise, have incited a mass refusal of taxes on half a dozen worlds. People are citing something called existential dignity clauses." Miriam looked up. "And the Empire's response?" He hesitated. "We filed a complaint." Her smile was paper-thin but somehow radiant. Vrix sat, antennae low. "I don't understand. We've fought wars for less. And yet, here we are, no scorched worlds, no martial law, just cascading absurdity. You use no force, and yet everything shifts." Miriam folded her hands. "Because we're not forcing them. We're showing them how absurd it already was." Vrix watched her for a long moment. "Is that what you call peace?" She didn't answer immediately. She studied the tree. "Peace," she said at last, "is the space where fear used to be. We're just redecorating it." Meanwhile, on the industrial world of Kalebenth, a revolt broke out. Not one of blood, but of bureaucracy. Entire cities reclassified themselves. Workers filed en masse to create microstates. Their charter began with, "We respectfully resign." They quoted Earth philosophers, several of whom were actually comedians. Kalebenth declared independence with jazz parades and interpretive dance. The Empire sent in suppressors. They arrived to find crowds waving flags with teacups on them. No violence. Just synchronized applause and unrelenting hospitality. The soldiers began questioning their orders after 3 hours of standing ovations. Back on Morner Prime, Alrex Tava's fist cracked the table during another emergency council. "Enough! We crush them now. Send the Third Armada. Hit the Mars colony. Show them we are not to be mocked." "But Mars is lightly defended," Chalet warned. "They'll expect a direct strike." "Good," Alrex snarled. "Let them expect it. Let them see the Empire's teeth again." And so the order was given. The Third Armada, 42 ships, 12 dreadnoughts, a planet cracker among them, set course for Mars. It did not return. From the moment it crossed into Sol's buffer zone, it was monitored, measured, and allowed to believe it was undetected. Human stations along the route sent signals of welcome, distress, neutrality, confusing, layered, all genuine, none useful. When the fleet reached Mars, it found the colony quiet, exposed. And then it found itself stuck. Mars had activated what Earth engineers called a gravity lasso, a collection of stealth satellites and artificial singularity nodes calibrated to alter local gravitational fields, just enough to tangle larger ships without damaging them. It was passive. Ingenious. Ridiculous. The ships couldn't move without colliding into each other. Then the messages started. Polite. Curious. "Do you require assistance navigating our tourist routes?" The fleet commander issued threats. The next message came with a map of nearby diners and a list of comedy shows recommended for relieving tension. By the time support ships arrived, they found the Armada intact, but humiliated. Officers had been retrieved wearing civilian clothes, sipping cocoa. Earth returned the fleet in full condition with the message. "Forgiveness is easier when you don't make us late for dinner." The Empire reeled. Alrex issued emergency declarations. No one responded. He sent summons to governors. Some refused. Some laughed. He appealed to his military, and found half had joined forums moderated by Earth advisors. The Empire was fracturing, not in rage, but in realization. They weren't being ruled. They were being tolerated. And now, they were being given options. One Empire governor broadcast his resignation with the words, "I just wanted to be respected, not saluted." It became a meme. Then a movement. On Eos 9, Miriam was visited by a new arrival, Envoy Hessari, a stoic elder from the Avros species, one of the few alien races that had always watched humanity with measured curiosity rather than contempt. "I have studied your species," Hessari said as he took his seat. "Your humor, your paradoxes, your need for hot liquids during moments of existential threat. I have read your Declaration of Independence. And your Twitter archives." Miriam raised an eyebrow. "I apologize for both." Hessari ignored the joke. "The Empire will not survive." Miriam did not smile. "We're not trying to destroy it," she said. "I know," Hessari said. "That's what makes it inevitable." He leaned forward, expression unreadable. "But what will you do when the galaxy turns to you for leadership?" She hesitated. Then, "We'll offer them tea. And ask them what they'd rather be." In that moment, the great conflict clarified itself. Not war, not invasion, but invitation. Humanity had issued a challenge. Imagine something better. And the galaxy, weary of hierarchy and hollow traditions, had begun to imagine. Still, it wasn't over. In a dark corridor on Mourner Prime, Draxel and Theta met with a council of loyalists. They spoke in whispers, codes, threats. The human threat had gone too far, they said. The old order must be preserved, even through fire. "We still have weapons," Draxelin hissed. "We still have secrets." But as he spoke, a message arrived on his personal console. No encryption. Just plain text. "Dear Vizier. Please stop. We're already bored of winning. Sincerely, humanity." Attached was a recipe for scones. He crushed the device, but it didn't matter. The fracture was complete. Not with explosions, but with an exhale. And in that silence, something new was being born. The sky above the Imperial capital bled crimson and violet, a result of Mourner Prime's collapsing weather shields, a side effect of neglected maintenance and an overtaxed bureaucracy too distracted by internal mutiny to fix their own atmospheric processors. The once pristine surface streets, polished to a mirror-like sheen for visiting dignitaries, now cracked under the shuffle of citizens too tired to march and too stubborn to kneel. High above, the council's spire flickered, its lights pulsing like a heart under cardiac arrest. Supreme Commander Alrex Tava stood alone in the observation deck of the Empire's last fully operational dreadnought, the Final Law. His reflection shimmered across the reinforced glass as he watched evacuation ships drift away from the planet like dandelion seeds. He felt old, not because of time, but because of erosion. Not from battle, but from laughter, symbols, double meanings, and that insufferable human ability to weaponize nuance. A junior officer approached, datapad trembling slightly in her scaled hands. "Transmission from Earth, sir. Priority code, Apex." He turned, slowly. "Read it." The officer hesitated, as if the words themselves were charged. "It's short. 4 words. Are we done yet?" Alrex closed his eyes. Not from defeat, but from recognition. They were mocking him. No, not him. The system. The symbols. The structures he'd built and enforced. He had tried to break them, to outlast them, but they hadn't pushed back. They hadn't resisted. They'd offered choices. He dismissed the officer with a grunt. Alone again he sat, unstrapping the sidearm he'd carried for 3 decades and setting it gently on the armrest beside him. A relic. Like him. Designed for a kind of warfare that no longer mattered. Across the galaxy, in the lunar command bunker under Earth's surface, Commander Elias Roque watched as the final metrics rolled in. The graphs were elegant in their devastation. Imperial cohesion. Dissolved. Resource networks. Fragmented. Trust indexes. Void. He leaned back, fingers laced behind his head, eyes catching the flicker of the solar feed. The Apex Protocol had not required armies. Only mirrors. Every Empire official had been shown a reflection they couldn't dismiss, their systems failing under their own weight. Their superiority proven performative. Humanity hadn't conquered them. Humanity had included them, by allowing them to realize they had never been in control to begin with. Roke turned to his console, and opened a line to the Silken rebuttal, currently in neutral orbit above the rubble-strewn moon of Cadres. Patch me through to Miriam. It's time. On board the ship, Miriam Tran sat in the greenhouse chamber, trimming her bonsai with deliberate care. The roots were spreading, subtle, quiet, inevitable. She answered the call without turning her head. Yes, Elias. You're on. I've always been on, she replied, wiping her hands on a linen cloth. But I'll speak louder this time. Within the hour, the transmission pulsed across galactic frequencies, uncoded, open, and translated into every known dialect, including several the Empire had deemed extinct. Her face appeared on every screen, projection, visor, and datapad. She wore no medals. No rank insignia. Just the red pin, still shaped like a downward-pointing blade, now glinting brighter than ever. To the people of the former Galactic Empire, she began. We come not as victors, but as fellow survivors. She paused. Let the silence hang, then continued. We understand that this transition has felt unfamiliar, maybe even humiliating. But we offer you this moment not as submission, but as evolution. 1,000 Empire systems listened in frozen tension. Let it be known, she said, voice unwavering, that Earth never sought conquest. Our species is young, impatient, sometimes prone to petty vindication. But we are also relentless in one specific way. We remember how it feels to be small. Her gaze intensified. And when you've been small for most of your history, you learn that laughter, resilience, and absurdity are your survival traits. You learn that no empire, no matter how gilded, survives if its people forget how to question it. Behind her, a visual tapestry formed. Peaceful riots. Silenced citizens now openly mocking uniforms. Alien children drawing human cartoons. Officers from both sides sitting in cafes, arguing policy over lattes. Not images of destruction, but of transition. The Apex Protocol, she said, finally naming it aloud, was never about toppling your empire. She leaned in closer to the camera. It was about asking, what would happen if we stopped believing you were gods? The feed cut, and the galaxy exhaled. In Mourner Prime's crumbling spire, Alrex Taval let out a laugh, not bitter, but strange and weary, like an old soldier reading the surrender order written in verse. He pressed his calm. Prepare the signal. All channels. I'll speak to them myself. He didn't deliver an apology. That wasn't his nature. But he offered what he could. An admission. A ceasefire. And an invitation. Weeks passed. Miriam walked the Capitol Garden on EOS 9, now shared by representatives of 47 species. Once a symbol of empire exclusivity, the gardens were now open to the curious and the hopeful. Bureaucrats who once guarded passage now passed out pamphlets about crop rotation and offered lemonade. She paused beside Vrix, who was feeding soil additives to a cluster of diplomatic orchids. You haven't insulted me in a week, he said, wings flicking with mock suspicion. I'm adjusting to peace, she replied. Takes practice. Some say the Empire might return, he offered, eyes narrowing. Miriam clipped a dead stem. Then they haven't learned the lesson. And what lesson is that? That control is a myth. Influence, however. She trailed off, turning her shears in her hand. That's an art. Elsewhere, a new governing body formed. Not a senate nor a council, but a round table of planetary stewards. Human representatives didn't lead it. They facilitated, moderated, watched. Earth declined titles and crowns. Offered templates. Told stories. Lent jokes. And in doing so, shaped everything. Humanity's true weapon had never been its technology. It had been its story. A species that survived itself, learned to speak in layers, and could deliver both kindness and threat in the same sentence, then leave you smiling. In the archives of what remained of the Empire, a new entry was logged, unclassified and universally accessible. Species assessment: human. Classification: apex predator, psychosocial. Preferred weapons: irony, empathy, adaptation. Tactical notes: avoid underestimation. Engage respectfully. Bring tea. In a bar orbiting the abandoned Empire shipyards, former Admiral Vesker now served drinks under the name Captain Maybe. He poured stiff liquors and stronger opinions. When asked how the humans had won, he simply laughed and said, "They didn't. They just let us lose to ourselves." Across the galaxy, small revolutions continued, not explosive but transformative. Schools taught history from multiple perspectives. Art flourished. Diplomats quoted Terran sitcoms as philosophical texts. Somewhere, a children's show aired an episode titled "Hugging the Empire Goodbye." And in a quiet moment, Earth received a final encrypted message from the last untouched Empire relay. No sender ID. No signature. Just a sentence. "You were right. It's better this way." Commander Roke read it twice, then leaned back and stared at the stars. He thought of Miriam, pruning her bonsai with quiet determination. He thought of all the sharp smiles that had reshaped a galaxy. And he whispered, to no one in particular, "We never needed to be the strongest. Just the last one standing, holding the pen." The galaxy, once ruled by force and fear, was now bound by stories. And the humans, smiling, flawed, unapologetically strange, were writing the next chapter.